Hello everybody, welcome to the next installment of the Investing for a Living Screencast. In today's episode I'm going to cover spending in retirement, a really important topic that makes a huge difference to retirement. So let's get started. Before I start, I want to say a little anecdote that I used to hear. Can't remember who, it may have been my grandfather. I used to say it, but the saying goes that the easiest way to double your money is to take the money out of your pocket, fold it in half, and put it right back in. So just to emphasize, it was emphasizing to me the importance of controlling your spending. So in today's screencast, I'm going to cover three key items about spending: post-retirement spending, yearly spending increases, and flexibility in spending. And you'll see how big an impact this can have. So let's get right to it. So post-retirement spending, as a general rule, you'll hear advisors, articles out there talk about that you need to plan for 85 to 100% of your pre-retirement spending in retirement. I think those numbers are very high for most people. In reality, they can be much lower. If we look at actually data of retirees, it shows that most retirees spend about 65% to 75% of their pre-retirement income or spending. And in some cases, it could be a lot lower. So for example, my wife and I, we spend less than 50% of what we did pre-retirement. There's other couples out there. You could look at examples of Mr. Money Mustache, Billy and Acacia Casserdoe from Retire Early Lifestyle. Several examples out there of people really clamping down on spending and achieving your early retirement or needing less to retire. A little more info on that. What are the big areas of spending reductions post-retirement? Housing turns out to be maybe the number one. For example, for us, we lived in a very expensive area, the San Francisco Bay Area, so by leaving that area, we were able to reduce housing quite a bit. For most people, it could be eliminating a mortgage. A mortgage can represent 25 to 35% of your pre-retirement spending, so paying off the mortgage, moving to a less expensive area, that can have obviously a big impact on what you need to spend post-retirement. Commuting is a big one for a lot of people. For us, it was 80 miles a day, so fuel, maintenance in the car, etc. was a big reduction once we left the workforce. Eating out was also an important one for us. We ate out a lot for lunch. During the time that we were at home and we were exhausted. Sometimes we didn't cook and we ordered out, sometimes takeout. So that went down as well. For some, that goes up as you're going out more, you're traveling more. But in general, I find that expense tends to go down as well. Clothes, you're not working, you don't need as many clothes for work. Travel, now you don't have to travel as much during peak times, for example. So maybe you can book some discount fares, have flexibility in your travel plans, etc. Another big one can be services. Now that you have more time post-retirement, services that you used to pay for, maintenance and such like that in the house, those you can do yourself and reduce spending that way. So just some examples there. All right, on the next topic, let's cover yearly spending increase. Now the models say, as I've covered in previous screencasts, it says that we should increase spending every year by the Consumer Price Index. Now in reality, no one I know does this. In reality, we live our life, we look at what goes up at the end of the year and adjust accordingly, or what went down, and usually maintain more control over spending than the models would suggest. And if we look at actual survey data, from some of the benefit research institutes, it shows that actual retiree spending grows at 1 to 2% less than inflation, and that can have a big impact on retirement. For example, in our case, when we started RVing in 2010, we had this big lifestyle change that reduced our spending from pre-retirement to post-retirement. But after that, our yearly spending actually has increased at actually less than 2%, or I guess more than 2% less than inflation. So can't remember the actual figures, 2.5, 2.6% less than inflation. And we know of several people that are able to achieve this and keep spending flat. I know of examples, for example, Billy and Acacia from Retire Early Lifestyle, they've kept their spending flat for 22 years. So that's a lot less than 2% less than inflation. So if we just use a small number, if we use a realistic spending of 1% less than inflation, that can increase safe withdrawal rates by about 15%. 2% less than inflation would have a much larger impact. So a lot of control here on yearly spending. If we look at some of the actual data, this chart shows actual retiree spending. So these are each dot is a cohort of retirees or a group of retirees, and how their spending changes as they age. The orange line is 0% Rio. That's a flat inflation adjusted spending, and you can see how spending goes down as retirees get older, and then goes back up towards zero as medical expenses increase. And that's where the -1% to 2% less than inflation comes from. Now, important point here is spending still increases, just at less than inflation. So I'll take an example from 1929 to 2014. The consumer price index rose at about 4% a year. So using these figures shows that would say that retiree spending grew at 2 to 3% a year. Okay. And the last one is flexibility in spending. If you're able to maintain flexibility in spending, that can have a big impact on your retirement. When it's important to have flexibility is when you have a bad market year, bad return year. So let's say 2008 was negative 20, 30%, depending on your portfolio, on the market. So during a year like that, to withdraw the same amount of money or to increase your spending for inflation would have a big impact on your portfolio. But if after a bad year you're able to cut back spending, let's say 10%, that can have a big impact on your safe withdrawal rate. So for example, there's a model called the floor ceiling model that models this, and it shows that it increases safe withdrawal rates by about 10%. So a big impact. So cut back a little bit during bad market years, and that has a big impact. All right, so that's pretty much about it. So in summary, spending can be much lower post-retirement than the standard advice would suggest. I think 65 to 75% is a reasonable assumption. In more aggressive cases, 50% is achievable as well. Yearly spending increases tend to be lower than inflation. The data suggests 1 to 2% less than inflation, and that's, I think, is accurate. And spending flexibility has a big impact on safe withdrawal rates. So you can model 10% cutback, and that can increase safe withdrawal rates quite a bit. So if we put these three all together, let's compare it to the model that we've discussed in previous screencasts. So a model I've talked about before was the $1 million portfolio, 4% safe withdrawal rate. That means you can spend $40,000 a year. If we use that model and we assume that $40,000 a year was our pre-retirement spending number, if we use 75% of that, we want to spend $30,000 a year. We plan to spend 1% less than inflation, and we're willing to cut back spending 10% during bad years. That means we can withdraw 5% of the portfolio now. Now what that means is now we only need a $600,000 portfolio to retire. In a more aggressive case, let's say we're really going to cut back and we can achieve 50% of pre-retirement spending after we retire. And 2% less than inflation increases, and 10% cutback. Now the spending would be about $20,000 a year. The changes of the less than inflation and the cutback allow us to withdraw 6% from the portfolio, which means that you would only need a $333,000 portfolio to retire. So you can see how big these impacts are. The yearly spending increases and the flexibility increase the safe withdrawal rate. So for example, we've gone from 4 to 5 to 6% safe withdrawal rates in these scenarios. So you can model whatever scenario you'd like, but you can see how big the impact can be. And with that, that concludes this screencast. If you have any questions or comments, please post them either on the blog comments or on the YouTube comments. Thanks.